I'd like to welcome our witnesses here for the first part of a split session. From the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland, we have Maurice Cohen, its chair, and Yoni Vider, Chief Rabbi. From the Ireland-Israeli Alliance, we have Alan Shatter, a board member of the Israel Council on Foreign Relations, and Natasha Hausdorff, barrister. You're all very welcome here today. We look forward to hearing from you on the work of your organisations. So I now pass the floor over to Maurice Cohen to make his opening statement, followed by Alan Shatter and Natasha Hausdorff to make their joint opening statement before we take questions. Mr. Cohen.
Kahirlach members, many who support this bill do so in good faith. I do not doubt their concern for the Palestinian people. I share it, as do the Jewish community in Ireland. But this bill is not a plan for peace. It is not a policy. It is a performance of misguided effort. It has been wrapped in the language of justice, solidarity, and resistance. But beyond the slogans, I ask you, what does it actually do? Who does it actually help? Because for all its principled tone, this bill changes nothing on the ground. It will not remove Hamas from Gaza. It will not reform the ineffective leadership of the Palestinian Authority. It will not foster dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians, nor improve the lot of the Palestinians economically or socially. It certainly will not bring peace any sooner. It is, as some have described, symbolism, a gesture. And while gestures can have their place in these circumstances, especially ones that carry legal, diplomatic, and social consequences, they should never be passed off as national policy or strategy in the pursuit of our vital interests. Let me be very clear. I speak as an Irish citizen born and raised here in Dublin, and as a Jew from a small, long-established Irish Jewish community that arrived here in the early 1600s. And that community is now increasingly fearful. We are witnessing a rise in racism and its not too distant relative anti-Semitism across Europe, yes, but also right here in Ireland. And while this bill may not set out to target Jews or Jewish life, its message is unmistakably felt by us. One of my best friends, with whom I went to school, a long-time respected member of the Jewish community, whose grandfather was the only citizen murdered in the 1916 Rising, said to me only 2 days ago, "I always thought of myself as an Irishman who happened to be Jewish. Now I know I'm just a Jew living in Ireland." Many of us think like that, because when the only country in the world you choose to boycott by law is the one Jewish state, not China for Tibet, not Turkey for Northern Cyprus, not Russia for Crimea, or Myanmar for its atrocities, then something is amiss. Selective outrage is not foreign policy, and double standards do not serve the cause of peace. This bill, in tone and in consequence, isolates moderates, empowers extremes, and undermines the credibility that Ireland has built as a voice for reason and reconciliation in the field of peace building. Ireland is proud of its reputation internationally in its even-handed approach to other conflicts around the world. We invite, we host, we mediate, we listen. But being even-handed means being a trusted voice to all sides to any conflict. So I ask the committee members, how can we offer ourselves as honest brokers if we legislate in a way that makes it clear we've already taken a side? This is not diplomacy. This is not a strategy. It's performance politics dressed as principle. And in that theatre, we're not helping Palestinians, we're just congratulating ourselves. We are told this bill is symbolic, but that's exactly the problem. Symbolism without substance can be deeply damaging. It may win applause in this chamber, but it sets fire to our credibility abroad. It tells one side, you alone are to blame. It tells the other, you are beyond reproach. And it locks both into further entrenched positions that make peace harder, not easier. If we truly care about Palestinian lives, then let's ask, what can Ireland actually do? Ireland should seek to encourage the establishment of a process that enables both sides to reach a shared understanding of what is the actual problem. We can engage in diplomacy that encourages cooperation and mutual accountability. That work, of course, is harder, slower, and often thankless, but it is real. We can support real education and de-radicalisation. This bill may feel good, but does it do good? Because it won't bring two states closer, but it might drive Jewish communities here in Ireland further into fear and isolation. Let me be very clear, criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism, but when criticism becomes a campaign, when it becomes law and no other state is treated the same, we have to pause and we have to question. This bill is not about policy, it's about posture, and I say Ireland can do better. We can be bold without being biased, principled without being performative, and most of all, we can be consistent. So I ask this committee, for what do we want to be remembered? For doing what felt good, or for taking decisions that led to good outcomes? For making a point, or making a difference? Let us not trade our integrity for a headline. Let us not confuse moral theatre for moral action. Let us be remembered as a country that stood not just with gestures but with grit, that chose diplomacy over drama and substance over symbolism and spectacle. Let us choose peace over popularity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I'll turn to Mr. Alan Shatter.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to briefly address members of this committee, of which I was a founding member and past chairman. I'm here today representing the Ireland-Israel Alliance together with Natasha Hausdorff, a distinguished English barrister and expert on European and international law, who is a member of UK Lawyers for Israel. In my limited time slot, I focus on the substantive provisions and politics of the draft prohibition on the importation of goods bill. A more detailed analysis of the bill is contained in the Alliance's 8th of July joint written submission with UK Lawyers and my own submission of the same date. The bill is essentially a sectarian measure based on falsehoods, riddled with obscurity and anomalies, detached from historical, religious and present-day reality, and abandons all lessons learned in our own peace process. While most of the discussion so far has focused on the relevance of EU and international law to the bill and its possible extension to services, the actual specifics of it and its enforceability have received little attention. It is that on which I focus, and Natasha will address the former matters. The bill's central proposition is to prohibit, and I quote, the importation of goods originating in an Israeli settlement, wrongly depicted by the bill's preamble as an international law obligation. The goods targeted are deemed by the the goods targeted are deemed by the preamble to be maintaining what it obscurely and wrongly describes as the illegal situation created by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. Even if the illegal situation depiction is accepted as accurate, as it is now known that the total value of commercial goods so imported in the 5-year period 2020 to 2024 came to €685,000, no credibility attaches to the proposition that such imports maintain anything. Rather than having any substantive impact, the bill is now justified and lauded by some as simply symbolic. Israeli settlements referenced in the bill from which imported goods are to be prohibited are an intended legal euphemism for locations in which Jews are present, reside or work on the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem. The symbolism is to publicise the Irish government's disapproval of any Jews doing so, to demonise Israel and to portray Ireland as advocating that occasions be Judenrein, a policy which reflects that attempted in the last century in Europe by Nazi Germany. It is a denial of 3,000 years of history, Jewish, Christian and Muslim theology, credible attempts to permanently end Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and present-day reality on the ground. In essence, the bill is the first initiative of any European government to enact legislation to intentionally boycott and discriminate against Jews since the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945. This anti-Semitic symbolism is reinforced by the absence from the bill of any prohibition on the importation of goods originating from any other occupied territory. The bill, if enacted, will, however, not only impact its targeted Jewish-originated goods, but also those originated by Israel's Arab citizens, by those of all denominations, by Palestinians, and jointly by those of different backgrounds working together. The bill is intent on maintaining division, not contributing to conflict resolution, peace and reconciliation. And its malign application to industrial zones, such as the Barkin Industrial Park, clearly illustrates this. It is of no relevance to the tragic ongoing Israeli-Gaza war, despite some saying it is. The bill is riddled with difficulties and anomalies. Its reference to the Minister of Foreign Affairs designating by reference to postal codes the areas of its application means no member of this committee truly knows from exactly where originated goods are to be prohibited. The absence of any definition of originated creates a myriad of difficulties illustrated in my written submission. The enforcement role of our Customs Service and the bill's connectivity to the Customs Act 2015 raises significant questions I also address in my submission. Apart from the expenditure involved, the potential chaos and bureaucracy enforcement of the bill could create at airports and ports in its application to tourists, residents returning to Ireland and business visitors needs to be explored, as does its violation of agreed Brexit amelioration measures and the maintenance of free movement of goods between Northern Ireland and the Republic. In this context, the bill starkly resembles the unenforced Father Ted-like provisions applicable to the import of condoms contained in the Health Family Planning Act 1980. It may ultimately prove to be nothing more than fantasy politics and political theatre that does profound damage to the reputation of our state, and which further undermines the credibility of anything said or proposed by the Irish government to effect conflict resolution. I believe the committee should clearly ascertain what, if anything, is intended to be done to enforce the bill, the cost of mobilising our customs services to do so, the practicalities and legality. I believe, in essence, the committee should totally oppose the bill's enactment. Hopefully we can return to these issues.
Thanks, Mr. Shepherd. So our third speaker is Natasha Hausdorff, who is addressing the committee remotely. You're very welcome also, if you'd like to make your opening statement.
Honourable members, thank you for the invitation to address you on the many misconceptions that have pervaded discussion of this bill. In the 2.5 minutes I have in opening, may I first stress that nothing of substance has changed since the previous bill was frozen after the previous Attorney General correctly advised that it contravened EU law. Last year's ICJ advisory opinion, which despite the language used in this committee is not a ruling, decision or judgment, is a non-binding opinion, which did not create any obligations or indeed compromise Israel's legal position in any way, as Judge Nolte observed. The advice from the court is only as good as the information upon which it is based. And in this case, the court relied on false and partial information and misapplied international law, as Vice President Sebutinde powerfully identified. 3 other judges also dissented on the legality of Israel's presence in East Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Second, under the EU law, the position remains unaltered. The EU maintains exclusive competence over the common commercial policy, including trade with third countries under Article 31E and Article 207 of the TFEU. National measures in this field are prohibited unless specifically authorised by the Union. Restrictions on trade between EU states and between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are also prohibited. Now, the arguments for the public policy derogation made before this committee distort the extremely strict interpretation of the provisions in the case law. The derogation is not available here. The distortions apply also to the central purpose of the bill, which others have argued draws upon the ICJ's opinion. The opinion referenced dealings by states with Israel, the state, and Israel's presence in East Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Its content bears no relation to a ban on the import of goods produced by private businesses, which is advocated by proponents of this bill. Third, the words of the US Foreign Relations Committee Chairman, Senator Jim Risch, that this bill is blatantly anti-Semitic have understandably been the cause of concern. The position echoes the fact that this version of the bill now abandons all pretense of going after so-called occupied territories and targets Israel explicitly. The long-standing US anti-boycott legislation necessarily means that this bill would create grave risks for US businesses in Ireland, with civil penalties of up to $200,000 per occurrence and possible criminal penalties of up to 20 years in jail and multi-million-dollar fines. It is to be expected that US companies will leave, a further gravely damaging effect on Ireland and her economy, as well as her international reputation. I rely upon the detailed written submissions to this committee by IIA and UK LFI of the 24th of May 2019 and the 8th of July 2025, in which we've addressed the legal position, and I will be happy to take your questions.
Thank you for that. We move. I just want to check if Deputy Ken O'Flynn is online.
Thank you, Chairman. Online and in the
So,
vicinity.
Deputy, you have 4 minutes, and that includes answers.
Would you ask him to confirm he's in Leinster?
Thank you.
You can confirm you're in Leinster House, Deputy.
I'm in Leinster House. Yes, I'm in the agricultural building in my office. I don't have a webcam, so my apologies, Chair. Look, thank you very much for coming in and giving the presentation. I think there's been a mention of, and I'd just like to touch on these things about credibility abroad. There was a mention from just the previous speaker there about US civil law and US companies will leave. I'd like to hear more about that, and I'd like to hear where you're finding this information, what US companies have committed to leaving Ireland or have said that they're ready to pick up and go and leave the Republic. And I also noticed that former Minister Shatter made a comment about credibility abroad. So I'd just like to hear on that. Rather than taking up the 4 minutes myself, I'd prefer to hear from the committee who's presenting the committee on those items, if that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Your questions?
Well, look, my question is, could I get a list of the companies that have committed to leaving Ireland if this law comes through? I'd also like to hear about the mention of credibility abroad. How have we been damaged? How they foresee us being damaged further by this? And additionally, what US laws we're actually we're finding that we're in breach of, and US fines that we may come into effect. So they're the questions.
Okay,
Chair.
so we've a little over 2 minutes for each of those. Ms. Hausdorff, if you want to address the first one, you brought up the American companies, so if you want to, yeah.
Thank you, Ciarán. These measures would necessarily, in the bill, create a government-required partial boycott of Israel. Now, that would force American companies based in these countries, so based in Ireland, to violate federal anti-boycott laws. The background to this is that since 1977, with broad bipartisan support, federal law has banned American companies from, and I quote, complying with, furthering, or supporting any boycott fostered or imposed by a foreign country against a country which it does not itself, is not itself the object of any form of boycott. And that's 50 USC paragraph 4841. Now, those laws apply even to US companies doing business abroad. And of course, there are many large companies doing business in Ireland for tax reasons. As advised, I shan't name any names. But the issue here, of course, is that even if one of these companies were to represent to Irish authorities that it was complying with this proposed legislation, it would necessarily fall foul of those boycott provisions and the penalties associated with them I have already outlined. That is the severe danger that Ireland is courting in my respectful submission. As far as Ireland's reputation more generally is concerned, of course, the economic consequences of this aside, Ireland is at pains, and positively so, to present itself as a positive place for international companies, American companies, to do business. This is not the image that I would suggest Ireland ought to be putting out to the world. And of course, the grave breach of EU law, which I hope we will have the opportunity to come on to analyse in due course, certainly because I fundamentally disagree with some of the evidence that has previously been given to this committee in the pre-legislative scrutiny stage. That, of course, does not paint Ireland well in the international arena. If it is unilaterally exercising national policy in flagrant violation of the common commercial policy exclusivity that the European Union enjoys. So for those two reasons, but of course many others, which I'm sure we'll come on to discuss, this will undoubtedly have a damaging effect on Ireland's reputation internationally.
The second,
Chairman, if I could just add two sentences to that is relevant, because it directly arises out of your hearings. What I was astonished to learn, well, I followed your hearings involving departmental officials, and I'm, like Natasha, familiar with the United States law, is both federal and state law creates huge difficulties for American companies operating in a state that boycotts a single state such as Israel. But what I was astonished to discover was, I think it was Mr. Kilwin from the department who was asked appropriate questions by a member of the committee. He said two things were said. He said the department hadn't yet produced its regulatory impact assessment and was only now having regard to and looking at the relevance of United States law to the draft bill. I would have thought that was an essential prerequisite before it was published, and I'd have thought that before this committee concludes its work, it's absolutely crucial that this regulatory impact assessment is seen by the committee, and the committee is fully briefed on the negative impacts this could have, not just on American companies located here, but in their expansion and new companies coming here.
As a long-standing former member, you'll appreciate I have to keep to time, so I'm not going to let time go over anymore. Okay, so you're going to stick to your 4 minutes, or we won't get through everybody. Senator Alice Mary Higgins.
Thank you. Ms. Hausdorff, you made a lot of point. You focused a lot on the idea of U.S. law and the idea this is a boycott of Israel. But Michael Martin himself has clarified that this is not a boycott of Israel, and indeed the bill does not affect Israeli goods. It only affects the settlements. So, is it your position that do you accept that the settlements built in the West Bank are illegal settlements and illegally occupied territory, or do you believe that they are just part of Israel? Because as I understand, these boycott laws relate to Israeli laws, Israeli goods. And maybe for the others, if I could just have clarity, I think it would be useful on that key question, which is, do you accept, as the ICJ, the EU, the UN and others do, that these settlements in the West Bank are illegal settlements and that they are on territory which is illegally occupied?
Ms. Hausdorff.
Thank you. I think it's important that we start by stating clearly that whatever legal position the committee members adhere to in terms of the application of international law, these are clearly territories administered by Israel, and therefore the boycott necessarily is targeting the goods produced and regulated under the State of Israel, and that is clear as to how the EU has treated the export of goods from the disputed territories and from Israel, and the distinctions that it has drawn between them. As to the application of international law, it is by no means accepted for my part that the non-application of uti possidetis juris here is something that ought to be endorsed. And in fact, this application of the term illegal settlements is rather more a political categorization than a legal one. Yes, the ICJ advisory opinion has adopted it. And I think in that respect, we need to be very clear about the paragraph that has been oft quoted in the committee session from the advisory opinion 278, upon which this bill has now been justified. This is what I referred to in my opening remarks because it does not change the position in any way. It is not a legally binding opinion, and it has to be considered that where the court has been so resoundingly...
Because I do want to get the others to come back on that. It was a very direct question, Chair.
Shatter, do you want to?
To the not direct question, no. I'm going to accept.
I accept what you're saying, but we have a time limit. Mr. Shatter, yeah.
Can I deal directly with a very simple aspect and straightforward aspect of this that the committee doesn't seem to consider
But if you
in
could
any
answer,
detail
if you
today?
could-
In
if you
answering
could
the
answer the
question,
question,
yes, in
yeah.
answering
It's
the
almost
question,
a yes or no.
in the United States, Jerusalem is regarded as the capital of Israel. That's the entirety of Jerusalem, east and west. In this bill, to put it in the most simple way I can, if someone visiting Israel or visiting the Holy Land, be they of whatever religion, from the Republic of Ireland or be they an executive from an American company, returns to Ireland and Dublin Airport, having purchased goods in Jerusalem, under this bill, that will be goods that can be confiscated. If they bring them into the state, it's a criminal offence. And as far as American law will be concerned, this will be requiring executives or tourists into Ireland to comply with a boycott that the
Thanks, Mr.
United
Shatter, yeah.
States
I'm
does
going to
not
go back to the
accept.
Senate.
I have a very specific question, maybe just yes or no, as I know my time is limited now, which is, do you recognise that the Israeli settlements in the West Bank are illegal? Do you accept that this is illegally occupied land?
Can we have
I don't accept
witnesses.
it's illegally occupied land because of the history in 1967 when the land in
So
the
you
West
don't
Bank
accept that,
was
Mr. Cohen.
occupied
Can
by
I ask
Jordan,
you?
and Israel
Thanks,
in a
Mr.
defensive
Shatter.
war acquired that
Okay.
land, and effectively that's where matters have stood because of the inability of the Palestinians
Mr. Shatter,
to
thank you.
effect
I go now
a two-state solution.
Maurice Cohen, can you answer that question?
Well, to Cathaoirleach, with respect, I can't answer that in a simple yes or no. It's a binary answer, and I don't believe this committee would benefit from that kind of oversimplification.
Well, if you can't answer it, then I will move on. Ms. Hausdorff, can you answer it?
Yes, I can. Under the proper application of international law, no, these are not as illegal settlements because Israel recovered that territory in 1967. It is also important to note.
No, I'm going to take that answer and look for people who may be viewing the committee outside the House. You may get the impression that I'm curtailing answers. I'm not. We're very restricted on time. Every member wants to contribute. Every member has just 4 minutes, unfortunately. So next speaker contributor is Deputy Shay Brennan.
Mr. Shatter, you made some concerning statements in your opening remarks. One notably is, and I'll quote it, the bill is the first initiative of any European government to enact legislation to intentionally boycott or discriminate against Jews. There's some other comments similar to that in that similar vein. What solid evidence can you point to that demonstrates that the Irish government's intent is consciously anti-Semitic rather than an expression of solidarity with Palestinians in their time of oppression?
Simply, Deputy, the provisions of the bill. If you look at the definition section of the bill, the definition section references Israeli settlements means a city, village or industrial zone located in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, the postal code of which is prescribed by order made, etc. The Israeli settlement reference is just a legal euphemism for saying locations in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and oddly Gaza, where there's been no Jewish person living since 2005, but locations in, say, East Jerusalem or the West Bank where Jewish people live. I mean, it's as straightforward as that. But the oddity of the bill, and I always think Jerusalem is a classical, a simple way to illustrate this, the oddity of the bill is if a tourist visiting the holy city of
Chair,
Jerusalem...
maybe I could interrupt there if you don't mind. I'm just conscious of time on it. So you're saying the Irish government is anti-Semitic in this case?
No, I'm saying what I'm saying is Israeli settlement is synonymous with locations where Jewish people reside, and ergo this bill is prohibiting the purchase of goods from those locations, and that of itself is anti-Semitic.
Why do you believe the Irish government is anti-Semitic?
Because they've produced a bill which simply targets Jews living in, quote, occupied territory. We could argue whether it is lawfully or not lawfully occupied. No such legislation has been produced in relation to Northern Cyprus, where Turks live, in relation to Tibet, which China occupied.
If you don't mind. So you're saying that because they produced the bill, they're anti-Semitic. Have you, in your opinion, have they any other motives? to be anti-Semitic?
I'm saying whether they're intentionally or inadvertently producing legislation that's anti-Semitic, it is the first boycott Jews bill published by any European government since 1945, and it replicates the type of legislation that it was initiated in 1930s Germany.
Thank you.
We'll move on. Mr. Shatter, if you were in government, which is not entirely hypothetical, as you've clearly been a minister before and also recently a Dáil election candidate, how would you deter the Israeli government from continuing its genocide and starvation of Palestinian families, including their children?
I would deal with it entirely differently. Firstly, your depiction of what's happening is inaccurate. There's currently a war taking place between what was the government of Gaza and Israel. The government of Gaza having invaded Israel and committed terrible atrocities. There's only one reason this conflict is continuing. It's because to this day, Hamas continues to retain hostages it abducted 646 days ago, 20 of whom are still alive, who are not allowed access to the Red Cross. 30 are apparently deceased, and their remains won't be released. And if I was in government, well, I would do three things. The first thing I do is I'd call in the Iranian ambassador and I'd demand he goes back to Tehran and ask that the Iranian government direct Hamas, which is a proxy of the Iranian government, to end the conflict, release the hostages, and to do exactly what the IRA did, which is decommission their weapons and announce the war is over, for the sake of the Palestinian people and the Israeli people, to give peace a real chance and a permanent solution a real chance.
Mr. Shatter. We move on to Deputy Donncha O'Leary.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the guests for being here. And I suppose I might just observe two things at the outset, and I'm supposed to respond to Mr. Cohen's statements. And I think it is important to put on record that, I abhor anti-Semitism, and I regret very much if there are people from the Jewish community who have felt any increase in relation to that in recent years. It is wrong, and it should absolutely be the case that the Jewish community in Ireland should feel welcome, should feel a part of Irish society, and I don't think it is right for anyone to put responsibility for the actions of the Israeli government on individual Jewish people in Israel. Just to put that on the record, I think it's vitally important. I would say as well that I agree actually with the point that has been made by several speakers that, and it's incorrect what Mr. Shatter has said, that there has been no legislation that has dealt with occupied territories and other locations. The previous piece of legislation, which I think was a far superior piece of legislation, authored by Francis Black, would conceivably have captured issues in occupied territories in any place across the world. And I think that there is much to recommend such an approach. That would have included Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara, Russian-occupied Crimea, Turkish-occupied Cyprus. So I think it's important to put that on record as well and to state that. My first question is for Mr. Shatter, and it's a question in the abstract, really. Do you accept that Ireland is bound by customary international law?
Every country is bound by customary international law, but unfortunately the reality is, and I'm someone who would have studied international law, in recent years international law has been politicised and weaponised and distorted within political debate to no one's benefit or advantage, and certainly not to the advantage of Palestinians.
Thank you. And you have made the point, I think, in terms of the balance between effect and symbolism and so on, you've made the point in relation to the scale of goods and so on. Isn't it fair to say that...
Sorry, Deputy, I just missed the last three words.
The interplay of symbolism and effect of political actions. Isn't it fair to say Ireland is a small country? Isn't it fair to say that many actions undertaken by an Irish government in the international context could be categorised as limited in impact?
There's so much more we could do than symbolism. Yeah. We have learned, as the Deputy would be familiar, an enormous amount arising out of our peace process and the 30 years of violence on this island. And there's so much of a positive nature we could bring to seeking to play a real role, not just a rhetorical role, to try and bring Israelis and Palestinians together, to teach people about how you bring about a peace process, the baby steps necessary. And instead we choose rhetoric and demonizing over and above productive, substantive engagement. And I think that's deeply regrettable.
Thank you, Mr. Shatter. And I suppose I am of the view that this cannot be the only element of Ireland's approach to the Middle East, to Israel, to the occupied territories. Clearly, a great deal more is needed. Our international conference happens this week and next week. It's important the Irish government plays a full role in it. But obviously, as legislators, we must look to what we can do ourselves here domestically as well. But I would make the point that a similar charge in relation to impact could have been made in relation to the sanctions that would have been taken against the South African government in the 80s. You were a deputy at that time. Now, I know that you reject the comparison. I'm not asking you to evaluate the comparison, but for any political situation, surely the fact that there is limited trade alone is not a reason to oppose sanctions or legislation that ensures the application of international law.
Except the problem, Deputy, is that what is being done is completely irrelevant in the practical terms of resolving that dreadful, awful conflict. And there's so much more of a positive, beneficial nature that we could genuinely do with a different form of engagement. And the current engagement generates newspaper headlines. It's to no benefit to Palestinians, hasn't affected the release of a single hostage, won't stop the violence, won't end the conflict.
May I just add?
Deputy Brian Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you, Chair, on the balance you're bringing to this debate. We've listened to the history, we've listened to the financial aspects of it, and we listened to the complex legal argument. But we have to listen to the humanitarian side of it as well. Now, I didn't expect to go down this route, but I'm going to speak about something that I didn't expect to speak about. I'm not sure what you did, Deputy Shatter, Mr. Shatter, over the weekend, but I got on a plane and I went to Cairo, and I went to meet the people on the coalface. I went on my own. There was no media circus. I went on a personal capacity, and I paid my own way. I met the NGOs that are on the coalface. These are hardened NGOs. They've been all over the world. They've seen catastrophic scenes. But what is going on in Gaza is simply on a different scale. I went and I sat on a bed with a young man that was in the prime of his life, and he has 2 months to live because of what's happening in Gaza. I played football with teenage kids that are orphans because of what's happening in Gaza. I held the hand of a 2-year-old child that had bullet wounds because of what's happening in Gaza. So when you say to me, and when you're saying to this committee, that this is a token gesture, this is fantasy politics, this is performance politics, I totally reject. How dare you come in here and make such statements? A Father Ted bill. You speak to the people on the ground that matter. Listen to what they've got to say about this bill. They knew everything about this bill. The NGOs that have seen what's going on. I just think the humanity coming from yourself, with all due respect, is just simply lax. It's my time to speak.
Sorry.
Okay?
I
think the most important thing that we should do is listen to people that matter most, is the people that are on the ground. They are asking us to continue, and I use the word continue, for Ireland and its government to continue to take the lead. Now, I think that's a huge statement in their fight for peace and justice for the people of Palestine, and find a long-term solution. So please explain to me why you think this is fantasy politics.
Mr. Deputy, I welcome the fact you made that visit. I visited Israel, the West Bank, so many times that I couldn't actually recall the number of occasions I've been there and the different people I've engaged with. And I visited Gaza in the past immediately after a previous conflict and engaged with people there. And why I'm saying this is fantasy politics and this current conflict is horrible, should never have happened. On the 6th of October 2023, there was an existing ceasefire. The 1,200 people slaughtered the following day were still living. All the people who've lost their lives in Gaza were still living. But Hamas chose to launch a war in circumstances where there was no protection.
Please answer the question. I'm asking you to answer the question. I know the facts. I've been there. I've been on the ground. I know the facts. I'm asking you to answer the question. Why are you calling this fantasy politics when we're dealing with the lives of people that are losing their lives while we're sitting here?
You are not dealing with the lives of people. What you're doing is trying to ban the importation of a small amount of olives and avocados from the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the total value of which over 5 years came to €685,000. It's a thing of complete irrelevance in the context of
But the point I'm making, and that you're not listening, it's not irrelevant to the people that are on the ground.
It is irrelevant because if they think this is meaningful and is going to contribute to peace and a resolution of this horrible conflict, they're being misled by Irish politicians. Deputy, I'm as committed as you are to see permanent peace between Israelis and Palestinians. No further wars. People getting on in security and harmony.
I think actions speak louder than words.
In their lives.
I agree to disagree because I think actions speak far louder than words.
Well, I don't think a single visit, Deputy, to Egypt is the be-all and end all.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. You said that.
Resolving the conflict.
Deputy,
and this bill certainly won't resolve the conflict.
And witness.
Chair, may I just briefly add?
Let's just take a little moment, okay? So, and remind you of the long-standing parliamentary tradition of respecting witnesses and respecting members. I absolutely appreciate the fraught nature of the conversation, and you have all my great respect for the way you have behaved yourselves up till now. Deputy Barry Ward.
Thanks, Cahir. I wonder if I could ask all the witnesses in the first instance if they accept that Israeli settlements in Palestinian territory are contrary to international law. In a simple one-word answer, yes or no.
I'm going to give exactly the same answer that I did to you beforehand. I'm not going to be forced into single answers.
Rabbi, do you want to say anything? You haven't said anything.
Sure, thank you. We feel the exact same pain of every innocent life that is lost in Gaza. We want to see an end to this war, and we want to see Israelis and Palestinians living together in peace. But what this bill, together with so much of...
I'm sorry, just is not the question I asked. Mr.
Yes or no answer to Deputy Ward's question.
I don't have a yes or no because there isn't one.
Okay.
But if the deputy is suggesting no Jewish person should live or reside in East Jerusalem, the deputy knows nothing about history.
This is a very simple question.
It is.
Either it is contrary to international law to occupy Palestinian territory by force and settle Israeli people there, or it isn't. Can you answer that question?
I can answer it, Deputy, if you allow me to do so in more than one word. Because you may not recall it, but there was a war in 1967 when Jordan and Egypt were engaged in trying to obliterate Israel with other states. And Jordan occupied the West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem, which it had occupied since 1948. And Israel acquired those territories.
This doesn't answer the question, Mr. Chair. What this is doing is saying
existed at that
this
time.
is whataboutery.
No, it isn't whataboutery.
It is either
it's just factual history. It's factual history, which unfortunately is ignored in this
I'm
House.
going to interject here. You've asked for
Could I hear from Ms. Hausdorff?
Yeah, Ms. Hausdorff.
Yes. The simple response, Deputy, is that one cannot occupy what is one's own sovereign territory. The example of Russia's occupation of Crimea has already been referenced in the committee sessions on this bill. That is a direct parallel. If Crimea were to recover, if Ukraine were to recover Crimea from Russia in the current war, in the same way that Israel recovered East Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, from Jordan, as Alan Shatt has just explained, it was Jordan that was in occupation of it between 1948 and 1967.
Is this not also whataboutery, though? Can you not answer whether Israel's enforced occupation of Palestinian territory is contrary to international law?
Well, that is a question that is predicated on misconceptions, that this was not Israeli sovereign territory in the first instance, which is contrary to the application
Okay, so
of
we can agree to disagree on that.
Thank you. Deputy. Yeah, I'm going to let the deputy.
Can I ask you a separate question then, Ms. Heston?
Really not interested in the
I'm going to
reason
let the
for
deputy.
I know you've been cut off a few times. I don't mean to do that, but there has been a constant conflation from all witnesses here between Jews and Israelis. Well, you would accept, I presume, that they are not necessarily all the same thing. There are Jews who are not Israelis, and there are Israelis who are not Jews.
Deputy, this is a very important point because, of course, this bill will target Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews and, of course, Palestinians that operate in the businesses. It is important to stress that this bill concerns goods that are produced by businesses, not settlements, as has been repeatedly misstated by members of the
But
committee.
they are all settlers if they are in settlements, are they not?
Of course not.
If they are producing goods in settlements, then they are targeted. And in my view, they are appropriately targeted because they are acting contrary to international law.
Well, let me correct that also, because where these goods are produced and sold by private businesses in the vicinity of settlements, not by settlements, which is the reality of the situation, on any view, these businesses are not illegal. So I'm afraid that is, again, incorrect.
Do you accept, though, there's a conflation and there's statements from other persons that this bill is anti-Semitic, conflates the idea that it is targeting Jews. Jews may be affected by it, but it is in fact targeting settlements and people who are generating business illegally within illegally held land.
Not at all, for this reason, because this is not illegally held territory. And the only reason that that label is being applied is because of an objection to the existence of Jews living in this territory. The phrase Judenrein, which Deputy Shatter has used, is entirely appropriate in that context. It has to be understood what the motivation behind this bill is, and the politics concerning it cannot fundamentally override the
But you believe the motivation behind this bill is anti-Semitism.
Your time is up.
That's totally incorrect.
The next speaker is me, and I'm not going to take a huge amount of time. I just want to ask Mr. Cohen, do you think the motivation of the Irish government behind this bill is anti-Semitic?
I think that may be an outcome of the bill. I'm not necessarily certain that that is the motivation behind it.
Okay. Ms. Hausdorff, I'm conscious that you were trying to get my attention, so I'm going to give you 90 seconds if there were a few points you wanted to make and couldn't make them.
I'm grateful, Chair. It is important to recognise, in the context of assessing the motivation of the committee here and those proponents of the bill, what the impact of this would be. One of the deputies spoke very powerfully about Palestinian suffering. None of the witnesses, so far as I can see, seek to negate that. But it is important that the cause of that suffering is correctly identified, and that is not as a result of Israel's policy here. That is squarely on the shoulders of Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist groups who continue to abuse and subjugate, terrorize their own civilians. All this bill does, and here I do differ with Deputy Shatter, because this is not simply symbolic.
Mr. Shatter, I think.
Mr. Shatter, forgive me. This is not simply symbolic. It gives succor to Hamas, and it worsens the situation that the deputy was earlier outlining. Why would those deputies or other members of parliament, senators who truly care about Palestinians, or at least profess to do so, seek to extend their suffering, prolong this appalling situation by providing this sort of support to internationally prescribed terrorist organizations? It is not enough that Hamas celebrated the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion and other measures, including that of South Africa at the ICJ. That speaks volumes to what impact this sort of legislation will necessarily have, which is to worsen the situation both for Palestinians and Israelis. And if that is the impact, then the only motivation for this can necessarily be anti-Semitic. It is not, as those proponents of the bill profess it to be, to support Palestinians, because it will only do the exact opposite.
Thank you. Look, I just want to make a few points that they should be on the record. One is obviously the events of October 7th were condemned by everybody and are continuously condemned, and were condemned again by the Taoiseach in the House today. And the government has continuously reiterated its objectives, the Irish government, which includes the return of hostages, the cessation of violence, and the opening up of the humanitarian flow of aid. They are separate to the bill. can I just say as chairman, because there have been some comments that have been made about, why some people are motivated and other people can answer for themselves. It is the dissent by the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Forces into the darkest of places that certainly motivates, as far as I can see, all members of this committee from a humanitarian perspective and no other perspective, and very definitely not an anti-Semitic perspective. We find that hugely hurtful, hugely offensive, slanderous, and rejected in its entirety. And I don't think my colleagues here would thank me if I didn't make that point. The next speaker is a senator, Senator Joe Riley.
Thank you, Chair. Can I begin on your latter point? You expressed the view of the entire committee there, Chair. And in fact, I think with respects to our guests, and you are very welcome and an important contributor to the debate, I think by making such remarks that it could be anti-Semitic, you almost fuel that and you create such a scenario. I think it's very regrettable. It's far from anti-Semitic. But to go back to the question, could I ask specifically, maybe Mr. Shatter or whoever wishes to answer, what we contend and what the ICJ in 2004 and International Court contends to be illegal settlements and expanding recently in the West Bank, the dispersed nature of those settlements, whether they're, as you say, as one speaker said, they're legal or quasi-legal, we contend the contrary. But the expansion of those settlements and their dispersed nature, surely, and I would like Mr. Shatter specifically to answer this because he did reference the two-state solution. Surely that prevents a two-state solution. If you're already putting pockets of settlements through the Palestinian, through the West Bank, through Jerusalem, right through, aren't you, by definition, ending the prospect of a two-state solution? If you could take that first.
If you have a second question, I'd ask it now.
Right. Yes, I'd like that one answered first, if you don't mind.
So if the witness can allow a little time, sure.
The reason there's been no two-state solution, Deputy, is because it's proved impossible for the Israelis and the Palestinians to agree a two-state solution. There were two huge moments in this. One under President Clinton, the other under George Bush. One was at the end of the Clinton administration, the other was towards the end of the Bush administration, when a two-state solution was practically negotiated. On the first occasion, Yasser Arafat, who I met many times, walked away. On the second occasion, Mohammed Abbas walked away. I agree that ultimately, Palestinians and Israelis, and the only solution is that they live side by side, be it a two-state solution or some other legal arrangement that they agree. The settlements that are being constructed are in Area C, as designated by the Oslo Accords back in 1993. And yes, if there's too much building in that area, it will create a problem. But the only reason I mentioned each of those events, one under Clinton, one under Bush, on both occasions, in return for Israel retaining territory in which the settlements were constructed, the Palestinians were offered alternative adjacent land to facilitate the creation of a Palestinian state. And they rejected
my
that.
second question.
Please do.
And it's, would you not accept the very fact that the EU are today constructing their 10 options is an implicit acceptance at EU level? It's a widening acceptance that something has to be done here, that there has to be a widening acceptance that there has to be an interference and a moral stance, and even a stance that puts commercial situations way behind morality and the lives of human beings.
Sure. Just one sentence on the previous issue, and I'll rapidly respond to that. The one sentence on the previous issue is, of course, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Iran, all of them reject the two-state solution, and their only objective is Israel's total destruction. And the Palestinians are incapable of agreeing a two-state solution, which is the primary reason we have continuing conflict. On what's happening in Europe today, there are apparently 10 options of possible action different European governments may take. I'm not, nor are you, Deputy, of course, privy to what discussions are going on behind the scenes, so I can't act as the prophet. I don't
There is
know
an implicit
what,
understanding
if any decisions would be made. I do know within European Union countries there's a huge conflict.
We need to do something.
There's a conflict of perspective.
May I just,
Deputy Sean
De-
O'Reilly,
I think Chairman Natasha's
May I
been
just-
trying to get in, just to.
I'll give you 30 seconds. Yeah.
May I just assist the Senator with the realities on the ground, which is that the Palestinians do have self-governance. They have self-determination in areas A and B of the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority, and in Gaza under Hamas since Israel's withdrawal in 2005. And if we note the consequences of that withdrawal, that has been the creation of a terror statelet and the necessary disastrous consequences in the last 21 months. I'm sure that is not what members of the committee would wish on other areas which are currently under Israeli administration, in accordance with the international agreements that Mr. Shatter referenced, the Oslo Accords. Okay. It's also significant that the key reason for the lack of a more prosperous Palestinian self-governance is the lack of a feasible working economy, which is something this bill would do further damage to, as opposed to building the prospects of peaceful cooperation in the future. So again, the complete opposite consequences of what is plainly intended by the good intentions of those in this room.
Deputy Sean O'Reilly.
It's rather hard to know where to start, Mr. Chairman, on something that's so deeply felt and so emotional. Ms. Hausdorff talked about people who truly care, and Rabbi Vider so correctly referenced the Jewish people's care for the people who are being slaughtered in this war. I think in being here and in enacting this legislation, we are responding to an Irish people who truly care. Irish people who have been concerned about the continuation of settlements, the creation of settlements throughout the West Bank. People who compare those settlements with the plantations which happened centuries ago. And if we're going to talk about history, why stop at 1946 or 1967 or whatever. Let's go back as far as we like. But there is that comparison in the hearts of the Irish people. But we are, as you have said, Chairman, to a man and to a woman here, and I'm sure in Israel and in Palestine and across the world. I was in France at the weekend, and all that people could talk about was the horror of what is happening, which was described so accurately to us by Deputy Brennan. The horror of the actions of Hamas and the horror being carried out under the instructions of Netanyahu. That is what revolts people. That is what goes beyond what we could consider normal in any set of circumstances. Now, okay, maybe this legislation is reactive. Maybe it is symbolic, but maybe this small country of ours can only offer symbolism at this stage because we've a way to go yet before our practical peace-making skills can come into play. Can I ask one question of all of you? There is relief rotting, food relief, medical aid rotting on the border of this land, waiting to gain access. What do you say to the international agencies who have so far failed in their requirement to deliver that aid? And what do you say to the Netanyahu regime about that aid? Should it not be forthwith made available to the women, the children, and the elderly men of Palestine so that they at least may see some future?
I would
Mr.
say
Cohen,
two
you haven't answered. I'll come to you, Ms. Hoffman.
I think we are too far from this situation to know exactly what is happening with aid. There's various different narratives with the aid. It's got to be stopped getting into the hands of Hamas, because then it doesn't actually reach the Palestinians that need it, or if it does, it's at exorbitant prices, which puts us out of their reach. From my understanding, and I'm sure different people have different understandings, that the aid distribution that the Israeli government has put in place is delivering enough food on a continual basis where they can, once they're not running foul of Hamas.
Deputy Bennett.
Can I just respond to what?
I'll give you an opportunity at the end, if that's okay. Thank you. Deputy Cathy Bennett.
My good Cahir, look, you have claimed that it would harm Palestinians if this bill goes through. That's not what the Palestinians themselves say. We have letters of support from 60 Palestinian NGOs, human rights organisations and trade unions. Palestinian farmers told the Irish Times last week that the bill is a source of hope. A Palestinian advocate will appear before this committee shortly, strongly supporting this measure. Palestinian representative to the UN formally called all states to end trade with Israelis' illegal settlements. Do you think Palestinians are not able to determine what is in their own interests, and that you know better? To any of the witnesses.
Well, Rabbi, I'll come to you because you wanted again. You can answer the last question as well and this question if you wish.
Well, I wanted to respond to the previous point that was made. If, as you say, all that Ireland can do at this stage is a matter of symbolism, and that is important, but I would just ask, why is the symbolism always focused on blaming Israel? Why do we hardly ever see blame put on Hamas, that they need to lay down arms and not keep on saying they want to eradicate Israel to repeat October 7th? Why is the blame never put on Iran? Why do we very rarely hear calls for the release of the hostages? And this bill is just another example of the symbolism which is always focused on demonizing Israel and laying all the blame squarely on Israel's shoulders, and not recognizing that there's Hamas and Iran and everyone else involved in this as well.
Chair, may I briefly answer both of those questions together, because they are linked, and the key is the misinformation that Hamas and its supporters are putting out. 1,847,915 tons of aid have been facilitated by Israel into the Gaza Strip throughout this war. As of last weekend, 73 million meals had been distributed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in its first couple of months of operation. That is the reality. What we are hearing from so many of those who profess to speak on behalf of the Palestinians, including NGOs, who frankly should know better, is a false narrative here. And the proof of that pudding was in the fact that they immediately came out to tell Palestinian civilians not to accept aid from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The reason for this is because it is the first mechanism that has successfully delivered aid, which has then not been diverted to Hamas. So the theme here continues. It is succor for Hamas, support for Hamas, and the prolongation of this conflict, which is at the core of the misinformation about aid, the misinformation that circulates these blood libels of genocide or the targeting of civilians, which is completely contrary to what Israel has demonstrated. And
sorry, thank you.
I have another question. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm still in my time, please. Thank you. So just again, as I said in my statement, this statement actually come from an agricultural worker. And just so we're clear, and that you are dismissing the views of the Palestinian trade unions who have strongly supported this measure. They don't know what's in their own interest. Is that what you were saying? That they don't know, because this is what they're stating. They want this bill.
I will tell you, the Palestinians that I listen to are those that were interviewed by Ohad Chemo in November on the ground in Gaza in Channel 12, not reports that made it into the international media, because it does not support the Hamas narrative, who said Hamas is killing us. Israel and the Americans are giving us aid. We want Israel to win against Hamas. Those are the Palestinians that I listen to. Those are the Palestinians that I care.
Sorry, can I just cut across again? I never mentioned Hamas. What I mentioned was in relation to an agricultural worker, that the people of Palestine want this bill to go through. Nothing to do with Hamas. This is the Palestinian, this is the people on the ground, an agricultural worker and the union.
And I'm saying that on the basis of
that is part of the problem.
No, Ms. Hausdorff has the floor. Yeah.
Sorry.
You okay?
Yes, I'm saying that on the basis of the evidence I have seen, it is Hamas that is spinning this narrative and that is supporting this bill because it stands to benefit from the repercussions of it, not the ordinary Palestinians. And if we care about those ordinary Palestinians, then we should, as they hope, we should be advocating the removal of Hamas, the defeat as soon as possible.
Excuse me, can I just go back to my question because I never got my full answer in time, John.
And that may be what the record records.
Yeah, again, I just want to say it, and just to put it on the record, do you not believe the Palestinian people in their own interest, if they want this bill, you're not in agreement with that?
All I can say to you, Deputy, is what I've previously said. Tragically and sadly, this bill will contribute absolutely nothing to resolving the conflict.
The Palestinian people said.
No, well then they're being fooled and misled because this
misled
bill,
by who?
By perhaps the Irish government, because the reality is this bill banning a small amount of olives and avocados coming from the West Bank and requiring every traveller into this country to be questioned and searched about whether they have some item in their possession is of no help to Palestinians.
Deputy Duncan Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just firstly, at this point in proceedings, I think it's worth reminding the committee that all the witnesses so far have failed to recognise that the settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal. None of them have done it either in their written testimony or in answer to questions from this committee. That's a fundamental point of divergence at the very start of this bill, which is what we're discussing. Okay, and we as a committee have to write a report. I also think it heavily caveats, with all due respect, subsequent arguments and testimonies that have been given by the witnesses in terms of arguing against this bill. If they fundamentally don't believe, which they do not, that the settlements are illegal, because that's contrary to EU law, UN law, the ICJ, and the shared majority, if not consensus, political view of this committee. We may disagree on other elements of the bill, but we don't disagree on the settlement. So I think that's a fundamental point here in terms of this entire hearing, is that there is that fundamental disagreement. So we diverge at the very start with all witnesses on this, and I think it heavily caveats. Now, my question, I think, Mr. Cohn, Rabbi Vider, and the other two witnesses, is you say that this is the only time Ireland have brought in such a bill and targeted Israel, and they're the only country that Ireland's ever targeted. But of course, in 2014. We had an identical ban was passed in Irish law prohibiting trade in goods and services with Russian-occupied Ukraine. Do you accept that as a precedent, and that Israel is not the only example of the Irish government deploying such a law?
Answer that question because there's a technical.
With all due respect, Mr. Shatter,
there's a technical legal issue in there.
With all due respect, Mr. Shatter, you can come in after I've directed it.
I would like to defer to Mr. Shatter on that.
Okay.
The boycott or ban the deputy is referring to was one agreed at European Union level by European Union states to be imposed on Russia for its aggression. And there's no similarity of any description here. And Deputy, your depiction, if I may briefly respond to it, and the focus on occupied territories, I don't think members of this committee want to explicitly state that East Jerusalem should be Judenland. No Jew should ever set foot in it or live there. No Jew should ever set foot in the West Bank, never mind live there. And no Jew should ever work with Palestinians together in harmony to generate economic benefits to all.
That's in the general head of this bill.
But this is what this bill affects.
No,
and if one example, the Barkin, no, Deputy, let me conclude, please.
Heavily,
can I
come back? I have 1 minute left, but I'm sorry.
I'll allow you a few extra seconds. You just finish your piece. And we'll come back to
it's a quick point. The Barkin Industrial Estate on the West Bank employs 20,000 people. 10,000 are Israelis. 10,000 are Palestinians. It survived this continuing conflict. They work together in peace and harmony, have done so for many years. It's the type of thing we need to see. But if goods were imported from the Barkin Industrial Estate into Ireland, if this bill was implemented, they would be confiscated, it would be illegal, and people could be prosecuted for trying to sell them in their shops.
Witness,
so this is where this bill creates division. It doesn't bring about reconciliation.
No, again, just another, because I'm running out of time now. You mentioned as well that all the areas are in Area C. Not all the areas in Area C. Not a big point, but again, it's another example of throwing in, something as a fact when it is not a fact. And I have to say, lauding, excuse me, Mr. Shatter, lauding the aid that's been given by the Humanitarian Gaza Fund is unbelievable. I think it's the biggest act of hubris and misinformation, and saying that we, who have been engaging with the NGOs on the ground, have been receiving testimony from those that have been delivering it for decades and are no longer able to give it, to then turn around and say the Gazan Humanitarian Foundation is somehow doing a great job. I think that's the height of hubris, and I think it's something that needs to be disregarded by this committee as well when we're doing our report. Thank you.
Senator Patricia Stevenson.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time. I know it's the end of the. You must be very tired with all of these questions. Mr. Cohen, you stated, and I'm quoting directly, the only country in the world you choose to boycott by law is the one Jewish state, not Russia for Crimea. And that is in fact factually incorrect, and that a ban on trade with Russian-occupied Crimea was passed into Irish law in 2014. So I just ask if you'd be willing to correct the record on that, because that isn't the case.
That is correct. I will certainly correct it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
That was on foot of a decision made at European level, not Ireland unilaterally imposing. No, it's a different thing. Not Ireland unilaterally imposing a trade restriction.
Can you let the Senator speak? Thank you.
Mr. Shaw, this one's for you. You claimed, you've spoken before about the bill being anti-Semitic and likening it to Nazi Germany. And just yesterday we received a letter from a number of high-profile Israelis, among them the former Israeli Attorney General. We've got a letter from Supreme Court judges, recipients of Israel's highest national prize, speakers of the Knesset and Israeli ambassadors who strongly support this bill. So just with that context, are you really going to claim that the policy supported by these Jewish Israelis is anti-Semitic?
You know the brilliant thing, Deputy, about Israel is a democracy. People have different views, who have extreme left-wing individuals, right-wing, centrist, and I haven't seen the letter. I saw it reported. They're entitled to their view. We are simply detailing our perspective on the bill.
I suppose you're recognising that there's diversity in opinion within the Jewish community.
Of course there's a diversity of opinion, but we do come back to one very simple...
That's it. Thanks so much.
Please don't cut me off. I've done you the courtesy. You asked me a question. Please don't cut me off. When I was a member of this committee, I never did that to a guest. I never did that to a guest. So if I could just conclude, the only individuals the bill intends to target are Jewish people in East Jerusalem and on the West Bank. It inadvertently targets Israeli Arabs, Israelis of all denominations, including Christians and Muslims, and Palestinians. And I'm astonished, for example, when Christian Aid came before you, they didn't address the negative impact on the Christian community in East Jerusalem of the enactment of this legislation.
Thank you very much. And I know you've spoken a little bit before as well about the peace process. You might be able to tell him from the north. Our own peace process in the Irish context in Northern Ireland, and the kind of Mitchell principles set out that peace negotiations can only work when all parties agree to ceasefire activity. To ceasefire activity contrary to international law. And I suppose in the context of what we're seeing now, like Israel is quite literally pouring concrete on Palestinian land, and that's illegal, under international law. So I suppose I'm wondering, do you really believe that refusing to support that breach of international law would be considered unbalanced?
I'm very familiar with the Mitchell principles and George Mitchell tried to effect the same resolution between Israelis and Palestinians as he effected in Northern Ireland. And it didn't work because there was absolute division within Palestinian society. And the same principles he applied to Northern Ireland, tried to apply to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And sadly and tragically, to sum up the words of a very famous Israeli Foreign Minister, Abba Eban, the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. This conflict could have ended so many years ago, so differently, without the dreadful events that we're all witnessing today.
I've got a few seconds left, so I will make the most of my time. You've also said, Mr. Shatter, that this bill is a matter of consensus in the political bubble only. But polling in the Irish Independent, I think just a few weeks ago, showed that an overwhelming majority of the Irish public support the bill. I think it was 74%, and they support a ban on trade in goods and indeed in services with the illegal settlements. You've also dismissed as wrong the views of the entire EU, the UK, the ICJ and the UN. do you think it might be you who's a little bit out of touch when we talk about this bubble?
The political bubble is one in which there's an absolute consensus. Everyone in this room supports the bill. The only issue really has been whether it should extend to services. That goes right across both sides of the House. And I know from my 30 years of experience, when there's that level of consensus on a really difficult issue and critical faculties are suspended, if the bill is enacted in years to come, it will be realised not only was an exercise in futility, but it was an exercise that sadly embarrassed and economically detrimentally impacted on this state. I love this state. I love Ireland. I don't want to see us in the international community being depicted in the manner that this bill will result in us being depicted, and I want us to be further advancing our economic well-being through the assistance of all the American multinational companies located here. I don't want us to do anything either to frighten them away or to inhibit their engagement.
So listen, we're coming to our last speaker.
Chair, may I please just address the legal?
I will allow you at the end, actually. I will allow you at the end, okay? Just on that consensus issue, because it's an interesting one. You see, I think this is just clearly I'm in the position of chair. One of the valuable things that witnesses could do, number one, there isn't an anti-Semite in this room. There isn't an anti-Semite in the Dáil. And yet there appears sometimes to be, I won't call it as big as or as strongly as a consensus. Certainly the senators, the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in the USA, seem to reflect a consensus about where Ireland comes from in relation to this. And it is a position of, to quote, profound anti-Semitism. You won't find anti-Semitism here. And you would do us, this country, which you love, and we all love, a great favour by promulgating that view as widely and as strongly as you possibly can. Final speaker.
Problem, Chairman, is the perception the bill internationally creates is the one the Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee articulated.
No, and so what I'm saying to you, former member, and Mr. Shatter, is this: you're influential. You haven't found that view here. Okay, I think you found a committee motivated by purely humanitarian motives. I can't influence you one way or the other, but as chair of the committee, I would implore you, if nothing else, to take that on board when you leave today. Senator O'Loughlin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Cohen, I listened carefully to what you said, and I know that it's heartfelt and with absolutely great sincerity. And it does concern me that you feel that we're trying to target Jews or Jewish life, and that is how you feel, and that you say that Jewish communities here in Ireland may be driven further into fear and isolation, and again, that's concerning. You also mentioned side, if somebody is taking a side, and this shouldn't be about taking sides as such, but if there was a side, the sides that I would take would be on behalf of the 58,000 people that were killed, the 138,000 people that were injured, the 75% of people that are displaced and are suffering from hunger, thirst and disease. When I come to Mr. Shatter, can I say to you, the only thing that I find myself in agreement with you is the possibility of an economic fallout, and that has to be a concern for all of us. You call this fantasy politics, but rather I would see that this bill positions us in Ireland as a principled voice within the international community. And I would put it to the witnesses, because I'm conscious of time, that I would like your clarity on how opposition to this bill would not be seen as a tactic endorsement of settlement expansion, and also to address the concerns that are there that continued trade with illegal settlements may entrench the occupation and actually incentivise further land approbation. And I think they're the two questions I'd like to put. Thanks, Chair.
Can I be very brief on this? The importation of €685,000 of goods over a period of 5 years is entrenching absolutely nothing. It's a thing of complete irrelevance. In the context of the other issues that have been raised and referenced, the perception the Chairman referenced derives, Chairman, frankly, from the focus, as stated by the Chief Rabbi and Maurice Cohen, on Israel, and the fact that this committee and the House doesn't prioritise calling in the Iranian government, doesn't prioritise, apart from the ritual call for the release of hostages, does nothing about it. There's never been a call from this House that the Red Cross visit hostages in Gaza. There's never been an expression of critique because Hamas doesn't allow that. The macabre spectacle presented on the release of hostages that looked like concentration camp victims elicited no reaction from any member of this committee. So if you think we're being harsh by saying there's a perception that this bill is anti-Semitic, the perception derives from the one-sided approach to this horrible conflict. Because I come back, I'll say no more tonight unless somebody asks me, to one very specific fact. It's been a fact since the 7th of October 2023. If Hamas long ago had released all the hostages, long ago, this conflict would have been over long ago. It's been normalised within the Irish political system that men and women, earlier children, be retained as hostages and negotiating cards and be kept in tunnels and starved. And this is why there's a perception of a lack of balance, a perception of anti-Semitism. And I reiterate, the one fact that drives many families in Israel to distraction is that the hostages have now been kept for 646 days, and we're talking about the export of olives and avocados, minuscule amounts, as if it's the most important issue in the world.
We're all out of time. I am aware that our remote witness, it has been more difficult for you to get in, so I'm going to give you 1 minute. I don't want you leaving this hearing feeling that you weren't heard. Okay, so you have 1 minute if there's some comments that you wanted to make.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was invited to address the matters under EU law and international law, and it is with some disappointment that I wasn't permitted to answer those questions. There is a pattern of both international law and EU law having been erroneously dealt with before this committee in previous sessions. May I, in the very limited time, perhaps just reference 2 examples and encourage committee members to consider the voluminous and detailed submissions on behalf of the Ireland-Israel Alliance and UK Lawyers for Israel. The first example, and the senator who posed the question on Russia and Ukraine has repeatedly, I think, misunderstood the importance of the Rosneft case. In fact, it squarely militates against this proposed bill being in any way lawful. This was a measure, as Alan Shatter has identified, that was implemented by the European Union. It was EU policy, not unilateral action by a member state. Therefore, it has no bearing in the manner which has been suggested by previous professors. But the case, crucially, did not assist with the analysis of public policy, as it has been repeatedly represented in evidence. It is critical that members of the committee understand that at paragraph 116 of the judgment, the court was clear that the relevant provision was in fact public security. And in that case of Russia threatening EU member states themselves, it was, of course, of a completely different order. At that paragraph, it's clear that the broad discretion enjoyed by the Council necessary for the protection of essential EU security interests and the maintenance of international peace and security was at the core. Other cases that have been mistakenly referred to include Confederación Paysanne, which is a case that affirmatively concluded that where policy was covered by other elements of EU law, including in that case law regulating agricultural products, Member states could not invoke Article 24.4 of the public policy exemption. Those are just two examples of cases that have been cited in support of this bill by proponents that say the exact opposite of what has been suggested. And I would advocate on that basis that the detailed, carefully compiled, accurate legal submissions that I have referenced be considered and reported by the committee, because whatever the Attorney General's advice may be, and I know it is hotly awaited, it must necessarily consider the realities of the case law and the completely unprecedented action that this bill would necessitate, putting Ireland outside of EU law and outside of the national consensus, the policy that has been carefully curated by the European Union, including its trade agreement with Israel. Thank you.
So, to former Deputy, to Mr. Shatter, to Natasha Hofstorf, to Morris Cohn, and to the Chief Rabbi, I want to thank you for appearing before the committee today, for your valuable contributions and for the respectful manner in which the session was conducted. If there was something you didn't get to say and you feel that is really important, you can submit that to us in writing to myself as chair or to the Secretariat. We're going to suspend for 5 minutes and we'll be back again because our session here must finish at 5:30. There's